What is up, y'all? Hope you're doing well. In this video, we're going to get into the business end of things again. This time, we're going to talk about creating budgets for video projects. And I want to first put a caveat out there that I am by no means an expert in this. I've been running a film production company for about 2 years now successfully, so I do have some information to share, but take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt and just use it in ways that will benefit you and your business. I like to do all of my budgets in Excel, so let's jump over to the computer and take a look at the Excel sheet that I've put together and the different sections that you might want to include in a budget that you're putting together for a client. So as you can see on this budget, I've broken things down into different sections, and I've got a number of hours that I expect to spend on something, my hourly rate, which this is what I actually charge if you're curious. This is in Canadian dollars. This may be a little bit low for some people. This may seem really high for other people, but I've found that this works pretty well for the clients that I'm getting and at the level that I'm at within the industry. I've got a total for what that will cost for each section. And then I have this area that is my take home. The important thing to know with the take home number here is it's not actually what's going in my pocket. This is what I'm not paying to somebody else. So there's all sorts of additional business costs, whether that's your accountant, your office space that you're renting, insurance on your equipment, all these things. This is coming out of that take home amount. And so I just like to have a rough idea of how much of a project am I actually quoting versus how much is coming back to my business, and whether that's going to go home with me as income or that's going to be redistributed to other costs. But just to be clear on what that means in the spreadsheet. Let's take a look at how I break things down. I've got 3 major areas that I am quoting, and that is pre-production, and then production, and then any post-production. And we'll look at these each individually. The sections that I like to keep account for in pre-production are first my discovery meeting. And my discovery meeting is when I'm having that initial conversation with a client on a phone or in person, really just trying to understand what they're trying to do. And I usually don't charge this out at full rate. You'll see on here, I'm only charging it for half an hour, but I'll probably realistically spend at least an hour or 2 with that client. And some of this is just goodwill, basically, wanting to land that client and make sure that they're happy with you as their supplier, and not charging them a bunch of money for that, but also acknowledging that you are putting in time towards their project and including that in the budget. Next up, we get into concept development, and this is generally what takes the most amount of time for me. So in this particular sample video, we've put in 4 hours for that. And that's, I would say, is a fairly reasonable amount of time for the average 3 to 5 minute video that isn't super complex. We'll kind of use that as the baseline for this entire sample here, is that this is your sort of standard local 3 to 5 minute production. Maybe it's a mini doc format or something of that type. After I've worked through a concept, sometimes I'll want to actually develop a storyboard, and not every project will need this, but I do like to have some basic guiding images that will help me communicate to the client what we're trying to do. So I've got 2 hours budgeted for that. And then if a client needs scripting for their particular project, maybe they're going to write it themselves, maybe I'm going to write it. So if I'm going to write it, I'll include that here. This project, we didn't need to source any locations, props, or talent. So this is blank here, but that is something that I would account for in pre-production. So our total pre-production cost for this particular video is about $640. The next step after pre-production is production. And so this is the day of shooting and anything else that's going into actually making that video happen. So if we look at the production day, I've gotten it broken down into a number of different sections, the largest being filming. So this is for my time, basically. And then I include travel in here. And this is, if it was a local gig, this is what my travel costs would be. This would obviously go up if I was having to travel further. Lodging, this had no particular lodging cost, but that would go there. I like to include a little bit of money for food, and then I also include a small amount for my camera and lighting kit. And I think this number that I'm including here is quite small if you were to compare what it would cost to rent my camera and lighting kit from a rental house. But I've found that with my local clients, I can't really go much higher with this number, or the budgets start to get really large, and it's really out of the reach of what most people are looking to pay. For larger projects, or if I was to rent more equipment, then I would actually be increasing this number here just to make sure I'm accurately accounting for that. In this particular project as well, we're not having any permits, location rentals, or talent needed, but those would go into production costs here. So really all you're seeing here is just my time. And so what you're seeing at the top here of $700 Canadian, this is my day rate that I charge people. If somebody just asks, what do you charge for a day of shooting? I tell them $700, and that I know will cover all my base expenses and give me enough income to feel happy taking on a job. On this particular project, I've also got a production day 2 budgeted in. This is just for recording a voiceover artist. So we've got the talents fee as well as my fee for actually doing the recording. Production day 2 could also be another day of shooting. There could be 3 production days, 4 production days, it just depends on the project, but I will include more lines in this Excel spreadsheet if needed for additional days of shooting. In addition, something to keep in mind is if you're doing like an outdoor adventure shoot or something like that, you're going to have to factor in all that time where you're not shooting doing the work, whether that's hiking to where you're going to go, all the setup process that's involved. So just make sure that you're accounting for all that within your budget, because unless you're looking at it as something to do for fun, you're really just taking away opportunities from other projects you could do. So you need to factor in the cost of all that time. Doesn't have to be your full rate, doesn't have to be what I'm charging, but you do want to make sure that you're keeping that in the perspective so that the budget is accurately reflecting what it costs to make this project. Finally, we've got post-production, and that often ends up being an expensive piece of any smaller production project. And so for this particular one, we're looking at $1,500, and that's primarily editing. You'll see I've got 10 hours set here for editing, 4 hours for doing color work, 2 hours for audio, 2 hours for revisions from the client, and then 2 hours to build some social media promo pieces. The important thing to keep in mind with post-production is you don't always know how things are going to go. Often you can imagine what a shoot day is going to look like, and as long as everything goes smoothly, you'll probably have budgeted the right amount of time to complete that project. I find post-production doesn't always go as smoothly, and so I like to pad the numbers a little bit. And this is to take into account if maybe the story just didn't come together in the way that I imagined, maybe the interviews that I were shooting required a lot more cutting to really make it work. And so I usually pad by a couple hours into each of these sections, depending on what I foresee that project taking on. If I knew that I was going to be interviewing 6 different people, I might actually include a lot more time for the audio portion of this, because maybe they're in different rooms, they're going to require different EQing and noise reduction. And I want to make sure that I factored in the scale of each project separately. Finally, the last section of this is posting and archiving, and this is a very small section, but basically some clients will need support with posting their video on YouTube, and that might be making a thumbnail, that might be the descriptions and tags, or whatever goes into posting. I just include a spot for that in case the client needs it. And then every project that I do, I include this $15 of 1 year of archiving their files, and this is basically to cover hard drive costs. So every year you're having to buy new hard drives to keep your information backed up. And I've had a number of clients come back to me a year later saying, do you still have that project? Because we lost it. And it's really good customer service to know that you have that. But it's also important to make sure that you're getting compensated for actually spending that money on those hard drives. So you can see here, this project came in at about $3,000. $2,875 of that is stuff that's coming back to me that I'm going to be using within my business or to pay myself, basically. That is all I do for making a budget. I don't generally show the client this spreadsheet. I've had one client ask for a detailed breakdown, and I gave them a simplified version of this. Generally, I will just provide my client with a quote that shows the final cost of a project. Sometimes they'll ask for a breakdown of pre-production, production, and post-production, and I'll maybe outline some of the things that is including within each of those categories. But a detailed breakdown of what I've put into this budget is generally not something that the clients that I'm working with have requested. It's more for me to make sure that I'm not overcharging a client and that I'm not underselling the time that I actually have to put into something. Because what I often find is that pre-production work is something that's really easy to underestimate how many hours you're actually going to put into that when you're thinking about all the inspiration and concept development that you're having to generate, that can take a lot of time. And so it's really important that you're accounting for that, because that's what your client is paying for at the end of the day. They're not just paying for a video, they're paying for all that work that's attached to making that video. So don't sell yourself short, include that time in a budget, and then you can back it up with a client if they do ask questions about why it costs so much. So I hope that was helpful. I'd love to hear how you guys work through your budgets. If you've got a more detailed budget, it'd be really great to see. If you've got any questions about using Excel or anything like that, I'm a bit of an Excel geek, so feel free to drop those down in the comments below. But until the next video, get out there, make something beautiful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.